Hey guys, Josh with College Football Nerds. Welcome to week one. College football getting underway. Gonna be previewing here Notre Dame versus Texas A&M week one matchup. We had a live show on Monday night for those of you that didn't tune in, but it's okay. We got the game preview here for you. For those that don't know, unfortunately, Daniel has been in the hospital since this weekend, so I don't quite have my normal production value stuff. So thanks for you guys for tuning in on Monday. Thanks for everyone for their prayers and support. Bear with us. Hopefully Daniel will be healthy soon and we'll be right back at it. But in the meantime, here's the preview we did from the live show of Notre Dame versus Texas A&M. This one's interesting to me mainly because I think there's issues with how these two teams are perceived. And I think it's very interesting that this game is kind of viewed the way it is by the bettors in view of what the rankings of the two teams are. So when I say that, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, brand name programs, both top 25, but Notre Dame's number 7, Texas A&M is number 20. Texas A&M, though, is actually the 3-point favorite in this game over top 10 Notre Dame. The over-under for it is 46.5. Both those things make a lot of sense to me personally. This looks to be a low-scoring game. I'll go ahead and say that Notre Dame, I think, has some tough matchups in this game. And the reason really is how these two teams are built. So let's start on the offensive side of the football with Notre Dame, because I think that's one of the more interesting thing to talk about. Notre Dame has a completely rebuilt offensive line. It's not entirely clear at this point who's going to start, but it's probably going to be less than 30 career starts altogether on the offensive line. Could be considerably more than that. There's talk that young players may take over maybe one or more tackle and guard spots. And so all across the offense, if you look at traditional returning starters, there's only 2 offensively. Now, the thing that makes that problematic is Texas A&M, in my opinion, could be one of the more improved teams in the country in a lot of respects this year. On the defensive side of the football, they bring in Nick Skirton, who was the Big Ten sack leader at Purdue. Shamar Turner is a returner inside. One of the only, somebody's saying it's only going to be 6 starts, and that's what I thought. It's the number I'd seen floating around was 30, but when I did the research of where it seems to be right now, it seems like some of the perceived returning starters or transfers aren't going to actually be the returning starters and transfers. And thanks, Paul Dodd just gave us a super chat. I appreciate it. And we, we'll see how things go. Obviously, Daniel's still ill in the hospital, but he's, I think, going to be able to pull through in the next couple of days and hopefully come home. And we'll see, the next week or two when he's able to return. But I appreciate again everybody's prayers for that. The thing offensively is when you have a great, maybe greatly talented but new offensive lineman, you don't want to be facing great fronts on the other side. And Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, Nick Skirton, those are not guys you want to be facing with a brand new offensive line. And even in the linebacker position, I mean, they bring back York, but Scooby Williams and Hill are good linebackers. And really just all across, even in the secondary, they're using transfers to shore up that secondary. I think Texas A&M is going to have a really good defense. And so when you look offensively at what Notre Dame is and what they're bringing back in Riley Leonard, I've seen the spin on Leonard be that he's going to bring more ability in the run game than Hartman, which is, I think, a fair statement because Riley Leonard is a guy that is an athletic player. Really, that Duke Clemson game, it was his legs that gave him an ability to win. But I think the other thing that people aren't talking about is, for example, last year Notre Dame did play some teams where, like Duke, they shut them down because they shut down the passing game. And Leonard in that Duke game was ineffective most of the game, kind of late came on, gave him a chance to win. But for most of it, he seemed kind of shell-shocked. He struggled with the pressure. I think in terms of polish as a passer, he's not quite there. And where Texas A&M has been the past few years is that they've either been one of the best run defenses in the country with a bad pass defense, or they've been one of the best pass defenses in the country with a bad run defense. 2022, when they had their, real total meltdown season, the thing that made them have that just total come apart in the App State game was that they had all these 5-star linemen, which, let's be real, NIL is how everybody's getting players. They were at the forefront of it. We said at the time that's what they did and that it was legal. I think that had backlash. And now for me to say that they put out enough money to have a top class doesn't seem controversial because that's how everybody's operating. They did the same thing under basically the same rules. They were just ahead of the curve. But those guys they brought in were highly athletic. They were highly disruptive players, but they were still freshmen. They weren't gap sound. They weren't sound in terms of how they were going to operate within the scheme. They didn't know how to be physical yet at the line of scrimmage, and they got run over really the whole year. They gave people fits in the passing game because they were so disruptive. That was the year where Jalen Milroe got his first start for Bryce Young, who'd been injured, and he couldn't hardly throw the football because he couldn't have time to throw. That is been who A&M has been. But with Elko at coach and with this roster being where it is, I really think that's probably going to slowly coalesce them into something that's more of a balanced defense. I think Elko is going to make them more sound and balanced. And I think that's going to be a real problem for a Notre Dame team that, at least in my view, I have a hard time seeing where the real impact players are offensively right now. We never know what we don't know. But right now, offensively, I feel like Texas A&M is going to have a step ahead. Now let's flip it over to the other side because it's obviously just as equally important. The Notre Dame defense is phenomenal. We did a video where we played college football 25. Daniel had Notre Dame. I had Penn State. You can go watch it. Spoiler, I had a 99-yard touchdown run with Drew Aller. And if you're wondering if the game was broken, the answer is yes. But you can go see that I had a lot of troubles with Misters Kaiser and Watts on Notre Dame because they have some phenomenal returning players, former Nagurski winner in Watts. And just all across the defense, they have returning playmakers coming back everywhere. A lot of the guys that are otherwise stepping up are highly touted players or, in key transfers for Northwestern at safety. This is going to be a phenomenal defense. And this is really, I think, the great question mark for the game. How good is Texas A&M really going to be offensively? Because their offensive line the last couple of years has been inconsistent, partly due to injury. The run game has been inconsistent. They rolled off with A-Chain, and I think they've kind of struggled to find somebody else anywhere near that kind of impact. Last year, though, I will say that Texas A&M was a very strong offense up until Connor Wegman got hurt. And I think that's where a lot of the projection is here because I do think Moose Muhammad can be an impactful player for them at receiver. He's had a lot of issues on and off the field throughout his career. If he can be dialed in and consistent and focused, obviously they're going to miss Evan Stewart, who I think was one of the best players in college football that transferred to Pac-12 now, a Big Ten team. But I think overall what you end up with is I think a Texas A&M defense that's going to be better and Notre Dame offense that is going to be probably something like they were last year, but I think a little bit worse because I just don't think at this stage in his career, Riley Leonard is where Sam Hartman was last season. And I think Leonard's ceiling maybe in the pros is even higher, but he's just not as far along as where Hartman was, partly probably because of just how many snaps Hartman played over the years. But on the other side of the ball, I think Notre Dame's defense is even better than Texas A&M's, and I think Texas A&M's offense is even better than Notre Dame's. It makes for a fairly even matchup. I'm going to go ahead and give my personal score prediction. I see this game somewhere around 24-21. And again, I always try to make my score predictions before I look at the over-under and whatnot. That puts it at a 45-point game and a 3-point spread, which, I can't lose because it's a push, but that was my actual score prediction when we were going into it. It's fascinating, but I think one of the more interesting things here is it says a lot about where these super conferences are, because like in the magazine I have in front of me, Texas A&M is ranked the number 9 team in the SEC, the 9th best team in the conference. And they are a favorite over number 7, Notre Dame, in the season opener. And I think the last couple of years we've had so much isolation, particularly Pac-12 schools who really haven't played any. They won a lot of games out of conference, but they didn't win a lot of big games against good teams. And even some of the ones they beat that were supposed to be meaningful, like Colorado over TCU, we tracked this all year. A lot of those teams ended up being major busts. Michigan State was not as good as was expected. Wisconsin wasn't as good as expected. And so it really kind of made things difficult to tell. But this game, I think, is going to be a big one that's looked at all year in terms of the relative strengths of the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC. And again, it's week 1, so we never know, right? These are predictions. I like to go on-field data. I don't have access to camp and fall scrimmages at Notre Dame and Texas A&M. So as much as I can say is this is what it looks like on paper, and we'll see in the next couple of weeks where they're at and have to sort all this out.